Hi, welcome. I'm Ben Olinsky, Senior Vice President for Structural Reform and Governance here at the Center for American Progress, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone here in person and online today. As the title for today's event suggests, we'll be exploring whether Alaska may in fact hold the key to saving American democracy. For years, America has walked the path of democracy, championing the values of freedom, individuality, and choice. The heart of our great experiment was giving the keys of the kingdom to the people, enshrined in the sacred right to vote. Now, of course, our experiment hasn't always been perfect. For too long, it was corrupted by slavery and by denying the franchise to women. And I'll be the first to acknowledge that at times, democracy and governing in a pluralistic world can be messy and frustrating. But it's better than the alternative, and throughout our history, we found a way to come together to improve our system and find common purpose. Today, our country seems to be coming to a fork in the road as extremism and division flourish and calls for political violence proliferate. This ultimately leaves each of us to make a conscious decision about whether we will allow these times to further divide us or reunite us, whether we will forsake democracy or recommit ourselves to bettering it day by day to create a government that better reflects the values of the people and places our country above partisan divides. To renew the promise of a government, as Lincoln so powerfully spoke, of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that brings us to Alaska. Alaska is a unique place. It's the largest state in our union with one of its smallest populations. It's truly been a frontier for literally tens of thousands of years. It may have been the embarkation point for humans on this continent, and today it is pioneering election reforms that could help renew our great democratic experiment by making our government more responsive. We are especially honored to have Alaska state legislative leaders from across the political spectrum join us today. They will talk about how changes to the structures of elections can reduce polarization and extremism, increase voters' choices, and encourage bipartisan policymaking. Alaska's new electoral system was first used in the 2022 elections, and the system is often called Final Four, but don't mistake it for March Madness. It consists of two key elements: a top four nonpartisan open primary and ranked choice voting at the general election. In nearly every other state, you can only vote in a primary election for candidates of one party. If you want to vote for a moderate Republican and a centrist Democrat at the primary level, you can't. And many states refuse to allow voters who aren't registered with a party to vote in the primary election at all. In Alaska's top four nonpartisan primary, any individual, regardless of party affiliation, can cast their vote for their preferred candidate in each race. The top four vote getters from this primary election then move on to the general election, where they are voted on via ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting allows voters to rank their preferred candidates. It's that simple. It's a simple process we engage in every day. If the store is out of mint chocolate chip ice cream, we grab a pint of chocolate brownie ice cream instead. And if they're out of that, we move on to plain old chocolate, also good. That's ranked choice voting. A recent study on the impact of Alaska's reform found that it was consequential and largely beneficial. The reform provided voters with more choice and a more meaningful voice in their elections. 60% of voters polled shortly after the elections reported that they were more competitive than other recent elections, a good sign they will yield better representation for the people. The new system also fostered more positive campaigning. U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski, a Republican, and Representative Mary Peltola, a Democrat, cross-endorsed each other for the 2022 races. The reform may encourage bipartisan policymaking too. Alaska's state legislature now has bipartisan coalitions in each house. And while it is too early to know the full impact on representation, more women and people of color ran for the state legislature in 2022, and they performed better than in 2020. But I'll let our experts from Alaska tell you more before I spoil it all. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to our esteemed panel. First, Alaska Senate Majority Leader Kathy Giesel. Second, Alaska House Minority Leader Calvin Schrage. And third, Alaska Representative Genevieve Mina. And our moderator for the afternoon, Rebecca Mears, Director of the Democracy Team at Center for American Progress. So please come on up. And as they're coming up, before our panel begins, we have a very special guest who would like to say a few words virtually. Please draw your attention to the screens for United States Representative Mary Peltola.
Hello, election reformers. It's wonderful to see so many people who are interested in what's going on in Alaska. Over the past year, people have been discovering more and more interesting things about our state, like how we've had coalition majorities in our state house and our state senate for the past few years, or how we elected our first U.S. senator by write-in. After we passed ballot measure 2 in 2020, implementing open primaries, ranked choice voting, and campaign finance reform, more and more people have been asking me about the Alaska model of politics. I've talked a lot about this Alaska model and what it is that makes us so different. We're a huge state with a lot of unique challenges. Only in Alaska can boats, bush planes, and dog sleds all be considered essential transportation devices. Only in Alaska do we need to be prepared for wildfires, blizzards, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and typhoons. And only in Alaska do we have to worry about our neighbors mowing their lawns at 10:30 p.m. In the face of all these challenges, Alaskans have developed a key trait for survival. It's not a big surprise. In fact, it's the basis for our entire society, even if we have seemed to have forgotten about it in the recent years. It's this: we all rely on each other. Contrary to the popular myth of Alaska as a place where people go to live in solitude off the grid, it's really a place where we form tight-knit communities and strong neighborly connections. We don't have the luxury of self-segregating into political camps. As I've often said, if you're stuck in a snowbank, it doesn't matter whether your neighbor is a Republican or a Democrat. It matters whether they have a truck and a tow strap and if they like you enough to come help. I could go on with a few more Alaskan stories, but I'm sure you've heard from our wonderful legislators who have joined you today from Alaska already. Instead, I'll take a few minutes to talk about my experiences running for office in the new Alaskan system. While a lot of ink has been spilled about ranked choice voting, I believe that open primaries are just as important to Alaska's success story. Partisan primaries are a tremendous obstacle to moderate candidates. These closed contests where 5 to 10% of the most ideological voters get to pick who the rest of us can choose from have effectively become filters that keep out candidates with broad appeal. It's no secret that I likely would not have won a Democratic primary, even in Alaska. I'm not traditionally liberal, and there were already so many traditionally molded candidates in the field. And by traditionally molded, I mean white men. When I heard that I wouldn't need to go through that process, I thought that maybe I could elevate an issue that all Alaskans care about. And when all Alaskans got to vote, they made it clear that a pro-fish agenda is a winning agenda. Thanks to open primaries, we're all talking about fish now, and that matters deeply to Alaskans. Turning to ranked choice, people have talked a lot about how it makes for more civil and respectful elections, as every candidate is incentivized to pursue more voters from across the political spectrum. I certainly saw this firsthand. It's never been my style to attack my opponents, but even in Alaska's other statewide races for U.S. Senate and the governorship, the candidates who won were the candidates who stayed above the fray and didn't engage in personal attacks. These victories also rebut the claim that ranked choice voting is a liberal scheme. Alaska elected a moderate Democrat to the House, a moderate Republican to the U.S. Senate, and one of the most conservative governors in the nation, all using the same system. Today, we're all working together on a variety of issues that affect our state, each bringing our own perspective and together representing a much broader range of Alaskans than ever before. Alaska's election reformers have shown that in politics, representation matters. And the relationships between our elected officials matter too. I'd like to close with a story that I think symbolizes this approach. When I was a new state House member in the state legislature, which is comprised of 40 members of the House and 20 members of the Senate, I was given wise advice, which is you need to have 59 best friends in order to be successful. And I really took that to heart. So in our legislative lounge, I was able to break bread with a member of the House who I had nothing in common with. We did not agree on a single issue, but we both realized we love cucumber salad. So that was our bond, is that we both loved this very German dish, and we were able to form alliances down the road. I think it's really important that we all work hard to make sure that we're reaching across the aisle and seeing everyone as a human being, as an American, and we're all in this together. Thank you so much for your time and your interest in what Alaskans are doing to improve our democracy. We've got a long way to go, but I believe we can make it happen together.
Thank you. The Congresswoman wasn't able to make it today for the panel, but felt very deeply about this. So we were glad to have her involved. So I just want to start off again, if I could have each of you introduce yourself, name your legislative title, your party affiliation, and how long you've been in office.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having us today. I'm Senator Kathy Giessel. I am a registered Republican. I've served in the Alaska Senate for 10 years. Then I had a 2-year vacation when I lost re-election, and I've been back again for another year. I'm currently the Senate Majority Leader.
Yes, hi. Good afternoon. My name is Calvin Schrage. I have been in politics for 3 years, not including my election campaign, and I currently serve as the House Minority Leader. I'm a registered independent and just very thankful to be here with you all talking about some of the election reforms in Alaska.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Genevieve Mina. I am a Democrat. I have been serving in office for 10 months, but I've been involved in politics since 2015. Very grateful to be here with you all.
Thank you. I'd just like to remind both our online audience and our in-person audience, we will have time for a Q&A afterwards. Any questions that our online audience has, feel free to pop in the Q&A. Senator Giessel, starting with you. You mentioned your vacation. Could you unpack that a little bit more, please?
Of course. So I was first elected to the state Senate in 2011. During those years, I chaired the Resources Committee, worked hard actually across the aisle, but it was a very quiet, unnoticed working across the aisle. In fact, even as a freshman, I passed a major amendment on the floor, collaborating with Betty Davis. She was the first African-American to serve in the Alaska House, and then subsequently the first African-American woman to serve in the Senate. She and I collaborated. I collaborated with other Democrats in the House. But I served for those 10 years. The last 2 years, 2019 to 2020, I was the Senate president. I believed as a leader that it was my responsibility to work with everyone in the Senate. So the very first day of the session, I arranged a meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning with the Democrat Minority Leader, Tom Begich. We both came to that meeting with some trepidation. Tom will tell you that. He was nervous, I was nervous. But after that first hour, we realized how much we had in common. We understood the issues that divided us on either edge of our political convictions, but in the middle, as lifelong Alaskans, both of us, we had so much in common. And so for that 2 years of my presidency, I worked very closely with Tom, as well as with Bryce Edgman. He was the Speaker of the House, an Alaska Native man who is an independent and was the Speaker. So the three of us worked very well together. We actually unanimously passed a budget in 2019, something that had not, in anyone's recollection, happened in the Senate before. When I was up for re-election in 2020, the Republican Party put up an opponent who was far more outspokenly conservative than I, and I was vilified for having worked with the Democrat Minority Leader and the Speaker of the House. Consequently, I lost a closed primary. So that was the start of my vacation. And then we had election changes, which we can talk about later, but I ran again later. Thank you.
Yeah. Ben Olinsky did a great job of explaining some of this electoral reform, but I'd like to give each of you a little bit of a chance to explain what this electoral reform means to you and how you message it to voters. And then we'll come back to what it meant in your election cycle. We could start down the line.
Yeah, so I'll take a stab at that one. So we have gone through some election reforms in Alaska that have been a little bit of a transition for folks. Not everyone adopts to change quickly and naturally, and so there has been a learning process through that. But just to quickly articulate some of the major changes for folks, and I'll talk to you all the same way I talk to my voters. The first major change is going to an open primary system where previously, as most of the country is familiar with, we had closed primaries. Well, I'll be corrected in a moment. We had a closed Republican primary and an open Democratic primary where you would have candidates on the ballot for either the Democrat or Republican Party, and those whoever got the most votes in that closed primary would move on to the general, along with the other candidates coming out of their primary. This first change going to open primaries dispatched with that. And so now there is just one ballot that everyone gets to vote on in the primary election. Anyone that wants to be on that ballot can put their name forward and show up on that primary ballot. Voters then get the opportunity to select just one, their favorite of all the candidates listed, and the top 4 vote getters from that primary then move on to the general. And so this really allows us to open up the slate so that anyone who wants to run, regardless of party endorsement or affiliation, is able to put their name forward for voters to be able to have a broader choice in that primary election, which frankly, I think is a very positive thing. Certainly in Alaska, there's a little less familiarity with the partisan electoral system. Folks don't necessarily realize that such a small percentage of the electorate oftentimes makes those choices in those primary elections. And so this has been a really positive change where a more representative candidate can emerge. And maybe I'll pass it on to talk about some of the other changes.
Well, Representative Schrage, how many people ran in the open primary when Representative Peltola was running in that open primary?
Geez, I don't know the number, but it was
48.
double digit. Yes, 48.
From across the state,
Yeah.
all political affiliations. Yes.
And maybe just while we're on the open primaries, I'll mention, yes, we did have a very large slate of candidates for that special U.S. House election. At the same time, I know many folks are concerned, especially as we look outside of Alaska, how these changes will transform elections. And so while we had one election that was radically different, I would note that we had many other elections, including my own, where in the primary election, there was still only 1 or 2 candidates, or maybe 3, but not the radical change that you saw with that U.S. House race. So it really depended election by election on the results there.
Senator Giesel, I think actually because Schrage brought it up again, let's hear about how your election differed under this electoral reform cycle.
Sure. So in 2020, I lost in a close primary. So now it's 2022. I've watched the person who replaced me during the legislative session. I didn't stop watching our legislative TV. And he was one of the people that was actually tearing the Senate apart. During my years as Senate president, I had 14 members in our majority caucus. The minority, Tom Begich's Democrat minority, had 6 members. I had to work hard to keep those 14 members together because the Republicans were so divided, even in our caucus, so that occasionally we had people walking out, occasionally there would be people yelling at each other. So I lost re-election. A new Senate president came in, and he actually had such difficulty, they stopped having caucuses because the Republican caucus was so divided. So I watched that and decided I need to run again. There's a new election system. I'm going to throw my name in again. It was completely different to run in this new system. First of all, there were only 3 people that ran in my election. That meant all of us were going forward to the general. So as a candidate, I viewed the whole year as a general election campaign time. Usually, any of you that have run for office know that as a candidate, we purchase a database. That database tells us this house has this person registered here. This is their party affiliation. This is the groups they belong to, et cetera. So that you go to your base, right? Typically. Well, first of all, I didn't have a lot of money. People didn't know that I could win again. So I didn't purchase that database. In addition, this was now a general election. So I went to every single door. I had no idea who was behind that door, but I wanted to talk to them because I wanted their vote. So that's what I did. I will tell you that normally I did not enjoy going door to door, but this was completely different. I was talking to people I had never talked to before, going to doors that I had walked past previously, and I was having delightful conversations. Probably the best example was the door that I knocked on. So I had been in office for 10 years. People sort of knew who I was. I knocked on this door and the gentleman opened the door and he immediately said to me, "Oh, you've knocked on the wrong door. I'm a Democrat. I'm a super voting Democrat. You've knocked on the wrong door." So I smiled and said, "No, sir, you're the person I want to talk to." We had a delightful conversation. We immediately identified the areas we didn't agree on, basically social issues, but all those things in the middle, we had common ground on. We both, well, I think he enjoyed the conversation. He was very pleasant. I enjoyed it. I don't know if he voted for me, but it was a great conversation that I would never have had if it hadn't been for that open primary. In addition, I had people, I would knock on the door and they would say, well, you know, we'd have this conversation and they'd say, well, I'm a Democrat, so I am going to vote for the Democrat candidate in the race. To which I would say, absolutely, I totally respect that, but you get to rank the other candidates. And I would appreciate it if you would choose me as your second choice. That's what they did. As I can document now with as the ranked choice voting came in, and the third candidate in the numbers was the Democrat, and her votes largely went to me. Almost all of them went to me that were ranked. So it was wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed. I looked forward to going door to door every day.
Thank you. I want to get now into sort of some impressions that you might have heard from your voters, constituents, other parties. Representative Mina, I'll start with you, particularly on this reform.
Oh, that's a great question. So for my experience and background in politics prior to running for office, I've been heavily involved in the Alaska Democratic Party. I had served in party leadership, was president of the Alaska Young Democrats. So I was very closely in tune with how Democratic Party officials felt about the ballot initiative. And our party, we're about 23% of the electorate. We're a little bit of the underdog, but our party was pretty split on it. And for myself, I was agnostic about the ranked choice vote and the open primary aspects about the ballot initiative. I actually voted against it because of other provisions related to it. However, after its passage and seeing the outcomes in the races and how it's impacted races outside of my own district, I've been a little bit converted into how powerful it's been, particularly in those races where you have purple and moderate districts where there ought be a purple or moderate candidate, an elected official representing that area. But in the past, there had been more extreme candidates and elected officials representing. And for myself, I realized that what was really powerful about the electoral change was that it helped break apart the extremism that was happening in the Republican closed primary. The Democratic Party had opened up our primary after 2016. We allowed independents to run in our primary, and also anybody who wasn't a registered Republican could vote in ours. But it was specifically the Republican closed primary that was creating a lot of extremism within those races that also translated to certain individuals getting elected, which led to a lot of dissent that was happening in the legislature. And so to see that electoral reform get enacted and see different candidates come in, it just changed the vibe of the legislature. And I say that as a former staffer as well. The other thing that I think is really important for me, there's a lot of cynicism in politics, especially on a national level. It's why I really love focusing on local and focusing on state. And for a voter to just feel like they have a little bit more of a choice, that's great. And that's a huge difference. It's not that much. And especially when you're on the campaign party side and you want to have the certainty to do the numbers and the polling to figure out who's going to win. it's okay to have a little bit of uncertainty, to not quite know how the votes are going to tabulate, if it means that the voters feel more optimism and engagement in the democratic process.
Amazing. And you can see that reflected in the numbers as well. Something close to 66% of voters did choose to rank their candidates. And those who ranked their candidates, 18% actually crossed party lines when ranking their candidates. I'd like to turn that now to legislation and how it impacted governing. Senator Giesel, would you like to start on what kind of impact you've seen this reform have in the Senate?
Sure. The Alaska Senate has a bipartisan coalition. So first, data, there are 20 senators in the Alaska Senate. My majority caucus is 17 of those senators. There are 9 Democrats and 8 Republicans. So the 3 remaining members that are not part of our majority caucus are Republicans who are more extreme in terms of policy. It is delightful. I will tell you that the rules chairman, I'm the majority leader, and the rules chairman that I'm working with, he and I have had many duels on the Senate floor over the years on certain policies. But he is so smart. I am having a delightful time working with him now in a majority caucus that has identified goals that all 17 of us agree on. Things like increasing funding for education, returning to a defined benefit pension system, passing a balanced budget, lowering the cost of energy. These are issues that all Alaskans view as critically important, and we've agreed on all of those, and we're all working together toward those things. Our Senate president is always reminding us it is critical that we stay focused on our goals and keep working together, because we want this bipartisan coalition approach to become the norm in Alaska.
And Representative Schrage and Representative Mina, how are things in the House?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think the jury is a little bit still out in the House in Alaska on how this will exactly impact legislation. Largely, that's a result of the unique, or maybe not so unique, political dynamics in the House. What I'm trying to get at is we suffer from some of the very thin margins that the U.S. House suffers from currently. And that has resulted in a very low level of bills being passed, a lot of frustration and pulling of the rope as to which direction that the House in Alaska wants to go. But what I will say is, while we haven't exactly seen how this will all play out in this second year, an election year, what I can tell you is that in talking to members, regardless of party affiliation, they are thinking about this next year, and they are thinking more about what issues are going to be the decisive issues in my district. What are the things that my voters really care about, and less about how is my party going to seek retribution on me if I don't fall in line? And so time will tell how exactly things play out in Alaska. But from the conversations that I've been having and the vibes I've been getting, I think that we will see results in this next year, and that those results will be productive bipartisan results that defy some of the party ambitions.
And if I may add, I think something that the electoral reform has shifted is also the dynamic in how we organize. And I'm very used to the legislature not being organized in Alaska, and then I forget that that's not a normal thing to do, and that your majorities are defined by the political parties. But that's just not simply the case because of the nature of coalition government. So there's a little bit of uncertainty sometimes when the margins are so thin after an election cycle. And after the last election cycle, we were unorganized. We didn't have a clear majority in the House. And so with a body where you have 40 members and we had a lot of turnover, so you had 17 brand new people, and we were up in the air and in limbo of who is going to be in the majority, there was a lot of negotiation about would someone jump over from the Republicans or someone from the Democrats to join in with the other to create that majority. And adding in the ranked choice vote aspect, I think it creates this opportunity to at least ameliorate that concern that I might not win re-election if I make that jump. And we've only been through one cycle of this. And I think there's still a lot of that fear that people may be punished. And it's totally dependent on your district, but the hope is that you don't have to fear being productive, you don't have to fear compromising. That's something that should be rewarded by your voters, right?
And what has historically been something that's been challenging to pass in Alaska, whether legislation or to discuss about? And have you seen any influence that this reform has had on that? Senator Giesel, I'll go to you.
Well, the budget, of course. I think that's true nationally as well. The budget is the biggest challenge. And yes, I believe we have seen much more collaboration on the budget. There's a much more open process now, understanding that everyone needs to have input into that budget. So yes, that's been much smoother. A big issue for Alaska is funding for education. As you all know, inflation has taken a bite out of wages. In addition, we have a defined contribution system for our retirement system. All of that has eroded our education system. In other words, we're not able to retain and recruit teachers. So those are issues that we're actually making progress on that I don't believe we would have prior to this bipartisan coalition.
I might also just add that as a result of these election reforms, I think we've seen a real difference in the way organization takes place. And I know the way we do things in Alaska is a little bit unique, but you know, in most states, you see one party or another takes hold of the majority of seats, and you know that who the majority is going to be. You know that the Republicans are going to have a majority, or the Democrats will have a majority, and then they will figure out their priorities for the upcoming legislature. And what we're seeing in Alaska is rather than just a mandate for one party or another to have control based on the election outcomes, we see a frankly drawn out process of collaboration of what are the issues that we can unite a majority around. It's not just about which party's agenda can we move forward, but rather what are the important priorities that we can really all come to terms with and work together on. And that's what you see as the impetus for organization in most cases. And I think that's a positive change because it's so much more focused on what do the voters need? What do Alaskans need from their government? And less about what does it require for this party or that party to continue to make advancements and continue to have more of an influence on the electorate. I think it's a positive change.
Right. One other example of this incentive to start working together is the freshman caucus that was formed among the 17 new members in the House this year. And it is a bipartisan caucus. It is the new people from both the majority and the minority coming together and committing to talking about the specific issues that we do agree upon. And it's not just us having meetings to have meetings. We're actively working on looking at energy or looking at even the legislative process, because a lot of us are new to the Capitol. I'm not, but other folks are. And I think there's a really great space for people to analyze how we've been doing things, how we've been doing the budget process, how we've been having finance subcommittee hearings and trying to figure out how to improve it. And so it's more broad than just what policies and issues we can work on together, but how can we actually create a more productive legislature?
You know, something that often gets brought up when talking about electoral reforms, particularly ranked choice voting, is that it may be confusing. How do you handle those questions and concerns?
Well, maybe I'll start and just say that I think any change is confusing to folks. It's hard, especially when you look at something as traditioned and something that's been so status quo for so long. To change the election system is a big change for folks. And I think a huge obligation of any state looking at changes like this is to spend a considerable amount of time on voter education, not only in the process of passing the initiative, but once an initiative is passed, taking the time to explain to voters what to expect from the process. What are the steps? What's the difference in the open primary system? And then how is it going to look in the general election? How will that tabulation take place and when will it take place? All of those questions have to be answered for voters, or there will be a tremendous amount of confusion. And we saw that confusion leading up to the election, but we also saw very robust efforts by Alaskans for Better Elections, from the Division of Elections, both in government and outside of a government or adjacent to government, all working once we had that new system in place to do that voter education. And then, with respect to how it actually played out and how voters felt about that system afterwards, maybe I'll pass it to Senator Giesel to talk about maybe some of the voter feelings afterwards.
Sure. And in terms of that education process, Alaskans for Better Elections was a citizens group that put forward the initiative, and they were at all the community events across the state for a year. They would use jelly beans of different flavors. They would have polls of ice cream flavors that people like to rank. What was most fun is they did a video with 7-year-olds and asking them to choose their favorite. I think it was ice cream. And so the children were debating, and then they'd rank, and the kids at fairs and things ranking the jelly beans that were their favorites. And here are the adults watching the child do it. And oh yeah, it is simple. Going door to door, I carried the ballot with me. The Division of Elections put out the template. And so I would take it and show voters, look, this is where you'd choose the first choice. Here's how you would choose the second. So it was us working, but also the Citizens Initiative Group and our Division of Elections. At the end of the day, the Alaskans for Better Elections did exit polling, and they found that 92% of the people exiting the poll said they had been instructed in how to use ranked choice voting. 79% said it was simple, and 60% said they felt that the races were more competitive. So that's feedback from citizens. They did feel informed, and they seem to like the system.
And also to jump in there, 99.9% of votes cast were cast correctly and be able to counted.
Yes.
So moving on from here, how do you respond to some criticisms that folks lodge that this is somehow a partisan tool?
Well, we saw the results that demonstrated that, frankly, it didn't favor any particular party. We reelected, and I think Representative Peltola, or perhaps you, Representative Schrage, mentioned we elected a governor who is a very, very conservative Republican. We reelected Senator Lisa Murkowski, a U.S. senator that has worked hard across party lines for the best things for Alaska. And you've heard from Representative Peltola, Alaska Native woman, again, someone that identified the things that Alaskans care about the most: fish, family, and I'm forgetting what her third thing was, but those first two things definitely appealed to Alaskans. So that, and the fact that, frankly, the election results showed that the people that were elected are reflecting their districts. We have a representative and also a senator who are extreme conservatives. They come from and are representing that district. That didn't change just because of open primaries and ranked choice voting. So it actually demonstrated that the citizens had their voices heard.
No, I think that pretty well covers it. I don't know that I have much to add other than, maybe just to put a finer point on the fact that there was not a dramatic shift in outcomes. I mean, really, if you look at the slate of all the House races and Senate races, so 60 some races, really only 3 or 4 races were tangibly changed by the ranked choice voting process. In all other races, the expected winner, who you would have expected to win in your traditional election system, was the winner through the open primary and ranked choice voting. And so this idea that this is some radically transformative tool that instantly changes elections and is used by one party or another to dramatically shift outcomes, I don't think that that's accurate in the slightest. Now, does it work on the margin to help, encourage candidates to run more positive campaigns? And does it allow for some greater choice on the primary ballot, especially in instances like our special U.S. House race? Absolutely, it does improve the election system on the margin. But this idea that it will radically transform or maybe give one party or another a huge foothold that they wouldn't have otherwise had, we haven't seen that in Alaska. And I just don't think it's the case.
Right. And then I'll just say again, I mean, the Democratic Party was split on the initiative, right? And a lot of that is because over 50% of the state is unaffiliated. And so part of the ballot initiative, and I think what had scared some party officials from any political party, was that you're empowering the independent vote. But that's not necessarily a bad thing if your higher goals are specific values and trying to come together on issues that will better Alaskans.
So some analysis of this electoral reform in the past election cycle showed that more women ran in 2022 than in the previous 5 years combined, or 5 election cycles combined, my bad. They also did some exit polling, and Native Alaskans said that 54% of them said that their vote felt more meaningful under this reform. Representative Mina, I know that you have some thoughts on representation, and I'd like to turn this question to you. How do you feel about this reform and other aspects we need to be doing to make a more multiracial representative democracy?
Sure, right. Yeah, I thought about this a lot because it was a talking point that I heard often during the ballot initiative. And it's this idea that you enact ranked choice vote and it promotes more diversity in the people that are running. And I always reckoned with that talking point just because it's not a panacea to get more representation. And I think that's so important for people who are big promoters of this type of initiative, because there are a lot of barriers for underrepresented people to run for office. And this type of reform is a great way to pair ways to uplift people to run more, but it also needs to be tied into changing the political culture. It needs to be tied into not being condescending to people who are coming from non-traditional political backgrounds. And I think that's just so important, because to say that this helps instantly get new candidates in is not just it. There's so much more work to be done, but it's just one piece of many more reforms and many more changes that we can do individually to just improve how politics is done and to create a new, better model that is built with community and that is built in aspiration to better our collective society.
Thank you. And before we turn over to the Q&A, I'd like to just ask one last question. If there's one thing you would like people to leave the room with or knowing about this reform today, what is it?
You know, what I would say is it enables every citizen's vote to be heard. By being able to vote your heart for your first choice, you're not risking having your voice heard, because you get to have that second choice. So you really, as my electors did, the Democrats wanted to vote for that Democrat candidate, but they also recognized that, frankly, in that district, typically Democrats didn't win. They still wanted to vote for her, and they knew they had to choose a second voice. At the same time, people don't have to choose a second one. Many Alaskans only made one choice, not many, but a few. And so all that flexibility is there, and the citizens' voices are much more clearly heard with the open primary and ranked choice voting.
Representative Shockey?
Yeah, I guess if there's one thing I would highlight for folks, it's that, just because we've had an election system that has worked for 250 years, and just because we live in the best country in the world, in my view, does not mean that the system we have is perfect. I hear all the time, why make this change? There's got to be some underlying scheme. This is, again, a tool of one party or another. And rather, I think all one has to do is look at the political system we have today, look at the polarization, look at the dysfunction. And, we can complain all we want about the product that we have today, but I think to change the product, change the outcomes, you got to look at the drivers, what's producing those results. And I think that we have a real opportunity in this country. We've started going down that path in Alaska to make tweaks to that election system to help produce better outcomes. And it doesn't mean that the system was outright broken. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with democracy inherently, but it also doesn't mean that we can't make incremental progress. And I think we're starting to do that, because there is, again, just talk to any average citizen in the United States, and there's a real frustration and just sense of despair almost at the level of dysfunction that we see in our country. And I think that begs us to look at reforms to our election system to produce better results that more accurately reflect the desires and hopes of the electorate. So we should always continue to improve.
And Representative Mina?
Yeah, I would say that I really love the way that the new system does allow the opportunity to have more candidates run. And there's just so many other barriers to have more people run. But for someone to make that decision that they can file and run in a race and not feel like they're completely upsetting their neighbors around them or they're going to alienate people. And there's, more complicated discussions to be had about races and their outcomes. But ultimately, what we want is a more representative democracy of people that reflect their constituencies. And to be able to just break apart the elitism, the closed nature of closed primaries, I think is so huge. Also, I love coalitions. They're great. You should do them here.
Let's turn it over to the Q&A. So if anyone in here has questions, quite a few.
Great.
I believe a mic will be coming around. And then if anyone online has questions, please feel free to use the Q&A tab.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. My name is Lisa Rice, and I have a question for Representative Mina. First, let me tell you that I am a registered independent here in Washington, D.C., and I'm the proposer of a ballot initiative to open our closed primaries to independents and institute ranked choice voting in primaries in general. I'm really intrigued by what you said as a voter, your attitude pre-2022 about not supporting the initiative. And I want to find out why you didn't, because I got to convince a lot of people here that, they need to think through some things. And that's what my conversations are about right now, is folks who are, they're on the edge. They either love open primaries and not ranked choice voting, or they love ranked choice voting and not open primaries. So give me your secrets, please.
Thank you for the question. Well, what I'll say is that one thing that we didn't touch upon is that the ballot measure that we voted on also had another provision related to campaign finance reform. And so there are a lot of technicalities just related to that influenced me to vote against it. But I also felt like my vote could switch on it depending on the day and the weather, because it's just hard to predict. Like, if you change your electoral system, what your outcome is going to be. But after the fact, I think the biggest influential argument that had an impact was that you break apart the extremism that happens in closed primaries. That's huge. And so when people are really frustrated that people in Congress or other legislative bodies aren't working together, I feel like that root cause of the extremism comes from your closed primaries that promote people to lean into whatever specific value set. And so to be able to open that up and allow more folks who want to get things done is a good thing, and to help this not push away, but not uplift people who don't want to get things done.
Other questions?
Hi there. Thank you all for taking the time to be here, and especially thank you for flying in from Alaska for this as well too. I just wanted to ask a question kind of regarding the way that your caucuses are formed, because I think that's something that's so unique to Alaska. When you say that caucuses are formed across parties, maybe that's just because that's an issue. That's something that we don't see happen here in DC or in other state legislatures. When these caucuses are formed, are contentious bills avoided entirely? Because there's a lot of issues today that are very polarized and politicized. When you say like you focus solely on like what matters to Alaska, being the family, the fish, stuff like that, is that really only what you're focusing on? And then from your opinions as well too, do you believe that this is a sustainable kind of approach for how these caucuses are formed amongst such a partisan and polarized national environment, and also influence from the state parties as well too?
Great question. So I told you that when I was Senate president in 2019 to 2020, it was difficult to hold the Republican majority together because of divisive issues and extreme viewpoints. And the following year, the following two years, that Senate president could not hold them to, they couldn't have a caucus meeting even. All that was a progression of senators realizing that this doesn't work. We have to work together. And so when those election results came in 2022, it was already a foregone decision. We need to join together. Whether I had won or not, they would have formed a bipartisan group because they realized we're not getting the work done that needs to be done to move Alaska forward. We have a problem in education. We've got to fund it better. We've got to support our public employees and our teachers. We've got to stop this very divisive. You are absolutely correct that those social issues can be a big deal. But in Alaska, in our Constitution, we have in our Constitution local control. And so we delegate to those local communities, those local school boards, the decision on those kinds of social issues. Gender identity, for example, in schools, that's a local decision versus the state handing it down from above.
Maybe I can just quickly add to that, though, Senator, because if I understand correctly, your Senate majority also has some issues which are more or less, there's an agreement not to pursue. Is that correct? I mean,
Yes.
So it's not just affirmative, what policies do we want to pursue, but it's also what concessions do we have to make, things that I would like on a personal level to see carried out in the legislature that I have to set aside for the time being for the health of the coalition. Is that not correct?
You are correct. Yes.
I believe we have an online question next, and then maybe
Yes.
Walter next.
Yes, just in a couple of questions from the online audience here. What would you say to other states who are considering implementing ranked choice voting and open primaries?
Well, actually, I do talk to other states on this subject, and I share with them the results that we have seen in Alaska, that it is a diverse result. It does reflect the local districts. Our statewide elections did come out with a wide variety of final outcomes, and not to be afraid of it. That actually you're empowering the citizens. That's really what we're here to do. And you're also requiring us as candidates to be much more authentic. We're not speaking to a party platform anymore. We're speaking to the citizens.
And one more online?
One
Sorry.
more online, then we'll turn back to in person. And this comes from an attendee who notes they've read about various groups, dark money and otherwise, trying to overturn the final four election reforms in Alaska. Why are they trying to do this, and are they likely to be successful?
Yeah, I'll take the first stab at this one. You know, I don't want to seem overly hostile to these groups, but I think there is a certain sore loser aspect that, anytime you don't have elections go quite the way you wanted them to go, anytime there's an unexpected result, there's a desire to point towards the system as being broken and incompatible a problem. So I think that's where you're seeing a lot of the opposition come. But at the same time, I again point to the fact for folks that are looking into our state from outside, we didn't see a radical change in election results. And so really you're seeing a frustration over one or two particular races and a desire to throw out any of the reforms because you'd rather take it all than make any sort of concessions. And I think that's where you're seeing that. Whether or not the effort will be successful, if I was a betting individual, which I'm not, I would place money on the effort not being successful. And I'm going to break that down just a little bit. I think, again, we instituted two reforms at the same time, going to open primaries and going to ranked choice voting. And I think you really have to look at those issues separately when you look at public opinion. Ranked choice voting, a little more difficult for people to fully wrap their heads around. It's a fairly substantive change to the way we determine the winner. And I think public opinion around that is a little bit mixed still. I would add that some of the benefits of ranked choice voting, specifically this idea that we're going to have many more campaigns run in a much more friendly and collaborative way, we haven't seen that in all cases. While we did see Senator Murkowski and Representative Peltola run more positive campaigns, we also saw opponents of theirs run very hostile campaigns that ultimately proved unproductive, but nonetheless, we saw some of that hostility, meaning that we didn't see some of the benefits of ranked choice voting that were promised. And so I think the results there, the public opinion is a little bit mixed. On the open primaries, however, my takeaway from talking to voters and fellow Alaskans, very positive. so much more choice, so much less partisan, so easy to understand. And then you ultimately end up with more choice on the ranked choice general election ballot. So, I think just if for nothing else, the fact that the repeal effort includes both the repeal of ranked choice voting and the repeal of open primaries, I think sets the repeal effort back and will likely make it unsuccessful in the end. Anything to add?
Good job.
One more question up front.
Hi, Walter Wilson, great panel. When I argue for these things in Maryland and elsewhere, one of the things I get back is you're going to weaken the party system even further. And of course, it's the party apparatus that is often the strongest opponent in a lot of states. In Nevada, for example, both the Democratic and the Republican party establishments fought the bill there. And I know Alaska is different, but has it changed how the parties operate? Has it weakened them or not?
Well, I speak from the Republican side. And no, I don't believe that it has weakened the party. Their voice is still very resonant in Alaska. Now, to some degree, the Republican Party, again, I'm only speaking for the Republican Party, has weakened itself with some extreme views. Right now, only 24% of Alaskans are registered as Republicans. That number used to be in the 35, 36%. I know this because I used to be very embedded in the Republican Party. I was a precinct committee woman, then I became a district chairwoman. I became the state vice chair of the party. I was very committed to the Republican Party, but I've seen it erode. Again, going door to door, I've met many people who have said to me, I used to be a Republican, but I changed my party affiliation these last 3 or 4 years. So I don't think ranked choice voting and open primaries have weakened the party. I think for the Republican Party, it's kind of weakened itself.
And just to speak on the Democratic side, and this is something that I think about a lot just because I've been involved heavily in our party. And for states where the Democrats are in the minority, like we're really on an uphill battle, I think a lot of party officials define the strength of the party based on the percentage of people that are registered Democrats. And I don't personally abide by that philosophy. I think the strength of any party should be based on what are you doing to help enact your goals and your visions to become a reality. And a lot of that can entail coalitions and working with independents. So I think there's a little bit of this insecurity because with a ranked choice system and an open primary, you lose that control to try to incentivize people to be mandated to become a specific party affiliation, right? But I think a strong party is one that people can trust in and want to be a part of without feeling like they're forced to be a part of. So that's just my thoughts about it. I don't think it's hurt our party, and I'm so glad to see Congresswoman Peltola in office. That's a huge win for us, and that's under a ranked choice vote system.
Thank you. We'll take one more question.
Hi, my name is Mike Cantwell. I'm from Independence for America. Could you tell me a little bit about the role that independents have played in Alaska? I know there are several, and they have been several over the past few years. And of course, Governor Walker identified as an independent also. And then a little Monday morning quarterbacking. He only, it didn't go to a second round in the governor's race by 0.6%. And so do you think if it would have gone to a second round, do you think him or the Democrat would have won? So 2-part question there.
Well, as the independent, yeah, what is the role of independents? I would almost say I am trying to look for the right word. I don't want to say agent, but, we really are in many ways the swing vote. There's a certain number of Republicans that generally align along roughly some platform of the party. And there's a certain number of Democrats that align with their party. And then there's this group of independents that don't have that affiliation or more inclined to cross party lines or cross over and have conversations with the other side. And I think that has positioned independents in Alaska in a place where It allows for a smaller group of individuals to work together as a almost party of their own or caucus within the legislature to broker an agenda for a majority. Now, that has resulted in different outcomes over the years. This year in the House, the independents split, with some going into the largely Democratic minority and some going into the largely Republican majority. But we've also seen years where the independents have really coalesced around a couple of issues to form a majority and really have dramatic and decisive influence over the agenda and priorities of that coalition. So it's really empowered independents who, as an independent, I like to think represent more of some of the centrist ideas. It has allowed us to have a lot more influence in that agenda that ends up ultimately being pursued in the legislature. And then for part two of your question with respect to the governor's race, I really hesitate to, go back and would have, could have, should have, how it would have turned out. I think that's very difficult to say. But what I would say is that I believe personally, I can't back this up with data, but had the candidates run more positive, collaborative, vote me first, vote the other guy second style campaigning, that we would have seen a better result and a more unified opposition to the incumbent governor who ultimately ended up winning. So hard to say who would have ultimately won, but I think there are lessons to be learned from that process.
Can everyone please join me for another thank you to our esteemed panel? And now that they're finally out of the hot seat, I'll get all of you out of your seats too. There is a reception just waiting for you right out these doors with drinks, foods. Be merry, eat and drink merry. And I believe you will join them afterwards shortly. So thank you, everyone.